Hello, I'm Wyatt, and today I'm going to show you every step I went through to go from complete scratch to a mostly completed level Blockout. So, pre-production. As a level design and pre-production can have a couple different aspects to it. One major part is the level design document. So documentation is a huge part for any part of game development, mainly just going through the context around the level, what's going to happen inside of the level. So how I typically start off is I would start with conceiving the level itself. Then I would go through what the player would be experiencing inside of it, do a beat breakdown basically inside my head, what I would want, write that down a little bit, then refine it, put it inside of a document for inside the beat breakdown, and then I would start drawing up a level. I started off with a pretty big idea with a player in a huge amusement park, like a Disney World or Disneyland kind of deal, where they would be going to separate sections of the park and then like leave back out the entrance. But instead, later on, I decide to reduce the size of the whole thing. So I'm also right now looking for landmarks. Landmarks are pretty big. Especially they're pretty easy to come up with too, especially inside of an amusement park. So you have a Ferris wheel, an arcade, and a roller coaster are pretty standard things to be inside of an amusement park. But later on, I make this into a carnival rather than an amusement park, which is much smaller in scope and would probably be much more like fast and fun kind of thing to make up. So yeah, at this point I'm still thinking it's gonna be an amusement park. So that if you can call that a circle, I guess was supposed to be more of a lake, seeing from the inspiration from the Pinterest board. But as I go through, I go, okay, yeah, see the scale of the Ferris wheel and the roller coaster are pretty small compared to the overall size of the park layout. So you can see later on I make everything much larger and much more carnival size rather than an amusement park. So this is the arcade. The arcade's kind of square. So when I first drew this up, I was thinking it was gonna be like a little tent, like a pop-up arcade kind of deal. But I also went through, personal experience and remembered that there's this one carnival I went to where they used like a Spirit Halloween will rent out a building for like a month for Halloween. This is more of like they rented out for like maybe like a week or something, and they popped up their arcade inside of it. And I thought that was really cool, so I decided to incorporate that into the level. I figured it'd also make it pretty neat to experiment with tiling with building assets inside of it, so that way I can do different kinds of build. So that way I can try to make buildings in different ways. Right now I'm making like the carnival stands that you do play like rigged games with, like popping balloons and shooting water guns at a target, that kind of thing. And my idea is that I'm using these. This is post-apocalypse, and you're basically going through like a bandit hideout. They just kind of use the carnival stands as like a way to deter people from getting to their boss immediately. So they just kind of like stacked it up into like a way where it's just gonna be guiding the player instead of a clockwise rotation through the park. These bigger ones are going to be restrooms. I went through personal experience again, and during a different carnival, they had both areas with porta-johns inside them, and they also had a trailer with men's and women's restrooms like connected with like water in between them, so they had a water source kind of. There was a neat little sink with like I think a retention tank under the bottom of it or something like that. It was really neat, so I decided to go ahead and try incorporating inside this level. So here I'm making just a little piece of land that would be leading off to the exit of the level. I'm going to be adding icons now. So yeah, where the player's goal is, where they start, little beat breakdown circles, beat markers, and some doors that would mark doors that you could like open, or doors that are locked that would need a key, or maybe they're just locked and they can't be opened because they're to block the player from leaving. So yeah, here I'm just writing out the counterclockwise nature of what the level is supposed to be. So one thing that this method of creating a level does, where you start with creating the layout first, then you think of the beats later, is you get a sense of what the player will actually be seeing once they leave or enter a building, and then it makes it easier to just kind of write down what they'll be seeing, what will be available to them in this area, and then what could possibly be taking place inside the area they're entering. So opportunity for combat or puzzle. In this video, in this project in general, I'm not going to be adding enemy AI or puzzles. I'm just going to be making the blockout for laying out how the level would be. Areas where locked doors would be, and where possible puzzle locations could be, and enemies are. They're mainly just put inside the beat breakdown. So this document ends up really small. Again, just to make it a fast, little fun project, but I can go ahead and just put an example of a more completed level design document would be like here if I edit it in. Yeah, there you go. I updated it to say Carnival rather than amusement park, just so it's not too big to do. So heat map for this level isn't really necessary because it's mostly just flat land. When you think of a carnival, it's like usually inside like a parking lot or like a fairgrounds area, not usually a place where it's very like hilly. It's not like a mountain. So usually everything ends up being pretty flat land. But here I'm using it just to show how I would be blocking sight lines to the edge of the world. Alright, and so now I'm taking snapshots of it and putting it into the level design document. This way, I wouldn't need to open up the Photoshop file and just open up the document. There you go. Stuff I need to see. And there you go. That's mostly it for this document. We're going to edit it later on to add more images of layouts for interiors later. But for now, this is what we're going to start off with. Landmarking. So in landmarking, it's going to be a pretty much empty scene or level here, having basically just a basic ground, and then you add the main landmarks that were inside of the level design document. So using basic shapes, I'm just plotting out how big the shapes are and where they're located. So there I'm getting comparison for the size of the carnival stands compared to a 2-meter tall player. And then looking at the design document for where they're going to be laid out inside a level. So it's good to keep your world outliner organized throughout building a level rather than organizing at the very end. So a lot of times you're gonna see me like add a bunch of stuff to the scene, and then it's gonna pause a bit, and if you look at the outliner, you see me just moving things around and renaming things inside of the outliner. Having these camera actors inside the scene with their little preview, the bottom right, the viewport, is very useful for just keeping in mind of what things look like from the player's perspective. Again, you're going to see me increase the size of these ground blocks a lot, but in the end I'm going to end up just making one huge one to cover the entire map. So a very important job to do while you're blocking out a level is to properly assign the right meshes to different objects so you're clearly stating what things are, and that they're different from other things inside the level. This way, when you bring it to like a level artist or something, they like, okay, so these are going to be like the same kind of building to each other. This is going to be a completely different building. This is probably going to have like different colors assigned to it. So just assigning these, they're not representative of what they're going to be into the final state, but they are just there so that way they stand out against the grays and the whites of the blockouts. So really there's not a whole lot to say at this point inside of this step. Mainly it's just trying to recreate everything that's at the 2D layout with very basic shapes, and then later on we go to more in depth on detailing the interiors of them and how the player will navigate around them. It's good to set up these player camera previews at each beat, so that way you really know what they're going to be seeing once they exit an area. And that way you can kind of make minor adjustments to the landmarks and other scenery to make it look more appealing, and to really guide the player where they're supposed to be going. Now, on the roller coaster, it's a little different than the buildings and the Ferris wheel, in that it's very it's not as defined as of a shape. So I need to make the tracks like individually and be careful on their incline rotations and all that. But it's still a rough shape of it's still a level blockout. So it's not going to be exactly what the track will look like, nor is it going to be very well polished before level artist gets their hands on it. But this is mainly to show the artist of what it would look like, of like the layout of the track itself. Then they can just replace the blocks with proper proportioned and detailed tracks. So loop is probably the weirdest part of the roller coaster to model, because it's just such weird angles going around it. But we eventually get there. There, I was looking at reference of how a loop exactly works, because it's not just a perfect circle; it's more of an oblong circle with a tight turn. Now, if I wanted this to be done faster, I'd probably try to look up either a free asset pack or buy one off the Unreal store for like a roller coaster pre-made like sections. But here it's a pretty small coaster, so I figured why waste money and do that when I can just try having fun with it. Now, to the 2D layout, there wasn't a loop. There wasn't like this really tall drop. There's none of this. So making it in the 3D art space really shows how interesting the sightline could look from the beginning and from different sections of the park. Then you're introduced to the coaster after the Ferris wheel, being able to see the loop in the like the weird curves and like maybe the stuff inside of it. It's really cool. It's just stuff you wouldn't be able to see from the two-dimensional layout unless you were to make like different viewpoints with like arts or like artists. At this point, I realized that I'm making the turn like way too high, and that the end of the track is like right there. So. Oh yeah, and also the making the turn is really difficult here, like just using the rotation tools. So I start off with like different key points of where like different angles will be at different parts of the ride, and then I just duplicate and mirror it. And then like, oh, that's way too high, so now I just lower everything. Now this is where a real roller coaster, this would be insane. One, because I think the loop is just the height for the loop is much taller than the drop before it, but wouldn't be impossible to make it. But also it'd be incredibly short, and I think you'd get incredible whiplash at the end of it. So yeah, at there I put a camera viewpoint at the end of the Ferris wheel where you'd be able to see the roller coaster, and you'd be able to see the loop pretty nicely, so I was happy with that. And so here's the camera viewpoint from the beginning of the level where the player will start off. I'm pretty happy with the landmark position, so yeah. Time to start going on to the next step. Landmark refining. So what I mean by this is that I'm going to be adding more detail to the landmarks. The arcade is going to be different because it's a whole building, so that's going to be more of an interior kind of design kind of thing. But the carousel, the Ferris wheel, and the roller coaster are going to be pretty simple to do for just refining their rough shape. Okay, so the carousel was a little simple, but I feel like it's pretty well done for a rough outline. So the Ferris wheel is going to be a little bit more tricky compared to the carousel. However, it's still pretty simple in its overall shape. It's always kind of a battle between how low you can make the vertex count on a circle while still making it look like a circle for its appropriate size. Some Ferris wheels have thicker frames than others. Some of them have really, really thin frames, but this one I think I go for a pretty medium thickness in the frame. So one mistake that I make throughout the video with a couple of different landmarks and different little pieces is that I didn't start off making the static mesh, with the brushes. I didn't start them off square with the grid, with a 0 rotation every axis. That was a bad idea. And later on, you definitely see me make some stuff on the square, so that way they're way better. But yeah, for this Ferris wheel and some other things, you'll see me just kind of mess up with some rotational things. So with this operator box for the Ferris wheel, you'll see that I'm really just making a small little place that like collectibles could be, you know, maybe like ammunition or health packs or maybe puzzle keys. I don't know. If later on decided like puzzle would be added, or you know, something that the player can collect be added. So it's just a little thing, a little place that, you know, adds to the atmosphere, and also could be used for like different little mechanics. Yeah, I also kind of messed up on the naming convention for these little bits of static meshes. When you're naming them, when you're creating a static mesh, you usually want to put SM for static mesh inside there, so that way it's more identifiable inside of the instead of a file view. I believe I correct it later on to make more static meshes, but you know, the sooner you do it, the less you have to do later on to fix. But yeah, you see me adjusting the, I believe that's the Y. I believe I adjust the Y on a lot of these objects, mainly because I didn't make the Ferris wheel on a square with the 0 rotation. So that's usually why you want to do that. And then once it's all completed, then you can start putting it however wonky rotation you want it. So this section of the carousel, I'm trying to make a little guardrail for it, so that way when the player gets up there, you can't like just jump off. So I started off with a low fence object that I had, but then realizing that I just kind of wanted to cover the entire thing with the same guardrail, and I want it to be basically the same rotation as the as the cylinder that's there, I just decided to make it go ahead and make a hollow cylinder and just cut out a little place for the entrance and exit. Just makes it a lot faster, easier, and it looks better too. So around here, I was figuring like, oh, maybe I can make the Ferris wheel cars. I guess, I don't know what you would call them, gondolas. Yeah, something like that. I would make them maybe explorable. Have just only one of them is accessible from the ground floor, at least on the wheel. The other one that's tipped over, I think you can also just jump into. Have it go ahead and, you know, have the player be able to go through it. Like maybe there can be a little collectible or something in that instead. Or maybe it can give cover if there's a firefight. I don't know. You know, just give options. So yeah, while I was looking at inspiration for the roller coaster, I decided to add these supports here. The cylindrical ones looked like the easiest to make, to be honest with you. But also it looked like it was probably gonna be like the best for just supporting the weight of a roller coaster. So just thinking of places where they would most logically be set up. You know, looking at inspiration of like, okay, how would they support the loop-to-loop? How would they support the drops and all that? So at this point, when I looked at the viewpoint from the start, I thought it'd be a nice thing to have the loop-de-loop be visible from the very beginning, or have a more interesting look to the roller coaster. So I thought, since it's a post-apocalyptic world, why not just have some of the track, like on the high bit, crumble down, you know, have an interesting little sight line towards the loop-de-loop. And it also gives me the ability to just kind of like have the tracks like droop down towards the broken pieces. I just think it looks more interesting and dynamic than, you know, just very rigid tracks. Yeah, I'm liking a lot of what I'm seeing inside the camera preview. So this section, I don't think the player will ever really see. And typically, you're going to want to try to avoid putting too much detail in places that aren't necessary. But around here, I figured it's going to be pretty simple supports, and if they're never updated via art assets, then I don't think it really matters. But if I were to ever in the future make a sightline that would include that area, it'd be nice to have structures that made sense, at least. Okay, here I start making the station for when this was a working roller coaster. Passengers would get on and off the coaster tracks, you know. And I figured this would be a pretty good place to have the player be able to get into the arena. But I didn't want to get into in depth of it. You know, I wanted to just make it a quick thing and then come back to it when I do like a lighting pass or something like that. So I ended up forgetting to include an exit into the arena. I just make an entrance into the building and then like 2 holes for like shutter doors for the tracks. But yeah, don't worry, I come back and fix it later. And it's good to check out the sightline to see if it at least looks like that's where you're going to be heading. See, when I told you I was going to show you every step, yeah, I meant it. Even making a static mesh to replace the fences. It was really dumb on my part to not make a static mesh in the first place, but, you know, better late than never. Alright, so this step wasn't that bad. It's yeah, just refining the exterior areas. The next step for interior decorating is gonna be a little bit longer. So right now I'm getting reference for the building that's inside of the map already, since I have it in a pretty decent size for the level itself. So designing the walls in the rooms of the arcade was, I really wanted to make a simple like room layout, and most of the complexity comes from the arcade machines and the kind of wreckage, I guess, from the post-apocalyptic raiders. So yeah, creating things on a grid will help you avoid situations like this where some of the assets that you made don't exactly line up. It just helps make things more uniform and clear. So I created a clean version of the arcade, basically what I think the layout would have been like before the apocalypse. And then later on, I'm creating passageways, basically just guidelines for the player of how to navigate through. Now that the apocalypse has happened, and raiders have made a mess of the place. And when you're done with the layout for any part of the map, it's good to just go ahead and take a screenshot of it and put it into the level design document, just so that we have easy reference for it later. So here I'm using tiling to make the arcade building. Before I had this project, I had very simple map tiles, where I had some simple walls, some corners, some doors, a double door, I think a window, and some floors. I think that's mainly it. Oh yeah, and some stairs. You saw me use those earlier when I was making the Ferris wheel and the carousel. So one mistake I made with this is, again, the building here. I don't believe I made it on the square, so it has some interesting rotations. I think on the entrance block, the back door block, and the main building. So they're all like different rotations, I think. And I just kind of made them where they were. I fixed a majority of the rotational issues. It's just when you're making it, it takes a little bit longer to correct the mistakes rather than just having the cause of the mistakes fixed from the beginning. And here, I discovered that, yeah, the tile set for the door is awful. With the player here, you can't even step through the door. So instead of cutting the camera and fixing it, I decided to just keep recording and show how I made basically a new tile to just comply with the rest of the tiles in the set. Yeah, I wanted the same clearance as the double door, but on the single door, so. When you think about it, this building's more realistic than other video game buildings, because what building in real life is actually perfectly square? Yeah, it isn't until I put the floors in where I realized just how crooked the walls are. So I think, yeah, about here is where I start to regret making the color bright orange. Just kind of makes a visual mess when you're in fast forward, and see, I apologize, but hopefully the the creation of the interior walls and everything should be clear enough. Yes, I even made it darker. It's unlit, it's still kind of hard to see. So now I'm making placeholder assets for the arcade cabinets. Just doing some minor research, how big they are, scale compared to a person. So 6 feet, 2 meters tall. It's like, all right. And with most of these assets, I need to check to see if the player can easily jump over them, or just like glide around them. Make sure they can't get stuck inside of them, if they're like recessed areas inside the asset. since the level design document, I said that I wanted the player to be required to use some of their mechanics to navigate through the arcade. In there, I believe I said jumping and crouching. I believe I end up just pretty much requiring crouching. But yeah, no, in this wall, I'm testing how easily the player can just get through a little crack like that. And once they just go through walking, I can just lower the crack down to crouch height, and then there you go. And around here, yeah, I realized that the crouching part of the blueprint is a little broken, so just fix that real quick. And here I kind of start off with point lights. I guess for no particular reason, I guess, but that was just fast to put in. Later I come back with better lights for this area. So with this step, we're going to see a lot of me just making placeholder assets. But that's just kind of how it is with interior design work. You need something to just hold the spot when everything's a block. So because I'm just making this a fast and fun little project, I didn't make any objects to represent the light fixtures. I just used light sources. But if you were to have a completely finished level block layout, you'd definitely need to have a representation of what the light fixtures are for artists. So I think the original concept of the two-player long table, or whatever this is, I think the original concept was for, like, you know, those domed, like, Monopoly gambling ones. I don't know. As I tried creating it, I realized that, like, a hockey table is just simpler, and I think would just look better. So when I was making the destroyed prize counter desk area, I figured the destruction didn't really have to be perfect. It just had to convey the idea to like an artist that within this amount of area is a destroyed prize counter. And like which side has glass and which side doesn't, where the material for the glass would stop, that kind of stuff. But of course, that kind of stuff is also subjective. When the artist also makes it, they could have their own artistic idea for it, and then just kind of collaborate on it, decide what's best. So my idea was for the objects to be like shipping crates that this carnival would use to pack up the roller coaster, and like 4 different like shipping trucks, 4 different semis or something. Okay, here I'm now making the interior of the bathroom on a grid inside 2D in Photoshop. So this is how I typically do it, but usually I have like the entire Photoshop file in like the same grid. So I usually don't mess with the grid sizing like this for a different artboard, but you know, I was just trying to make it proportionate to the other art pieces inside this Photoshop file. In the 2D design, you don't really have any data for how tall the interiors of buildings are, so here I'd be experimenting with how tall I feel like the interior of a trailer restroom should feel. I noticed that the brush version of this outhouse is shorter, so I added stilts so that they go into the ground, so that we can just have varying heights for the restroom. So here I made a reflective mesh material. I just made a basic one. And then I believe I experiment with, I forget what it was. It was a specific reflection plane thing. I saw I was supposed to make really accurate reflections, but then I realized that was too cumbersome, and I was like, just use a basic reflection rect, I guess, rect probe or something like that. Should be pretty easy to use. And so here I realized that having a third one near the beginning might be a good idea. I forgot to add lights to the to the base copy of the bathroom, so added some there, and then replaced the other ones. Alright, and so that's the end of interior design, so now time to go for exterior. Foliage in light refine. So in Unreal, I really haven't worked with foliage all that much, so you're going to see me experiment a lot with just the density of trees and fixing the light maps of these assets I got for free a while ago. But yeah, no, these assets are really nice. It's just they're really texture heavy and their light maps are really dense, so I had to experiment with reducing their light map quality so that way I could reduce the light map baking time like by a lot. Alright, here we go. So this part just makes it so much easier. So just made a huge, massive block and then added a little bit of terrain under it that I'm going to raise on the edges so that I can block the line of sight from the world's edge. Again, these are some beautiful foliage assets. It's just I'm inexperienced with foliage in Unreal in general, so figuring out how to properly do light mapping data on these trees and bushes took a little bit of time and a lot of light map baking. Definitely don't pay any mind to the shape the map takes up once the trees surround it. It's totally safe for YouTube. Just trust me on that one, bro. Oh yeah, and also you want to keep in mind when you're doing this foliage to not block the line of sight that you really want. And so here I'm deleting trees and remaking their sizes to be more appropriate and to continue to show the roller coaster and what's coming up. Another thing that you want to look out for is placing trees and bushes too close to these buildings, because they can just pop into the interior. And so you have to go on the back out. You have to go back on the outside and delete them, replace them, maybe rotate them. Alright, and so finally you want to do a couple more just walkthroughs, go into buildings, look around, make sure you didn't put in a bunch of foliage on accident inside the buildings. You're going to see that I walked past them, but after I stopped recording, I did remove the foliage and then did a little bit of cinematic camera work that you saw at the very beginning of the video. This project took, I want to say maybe like 20 hours total. I had to spread it through a couple days, mainly because this was just a project I was doing when I had free time. Again, this isn't like a fully complete one. I would still want to make rough interiors of what the stands would be like, make some basic models for like some toilets or something. You know, just other assets you would give to an artist to make a better refined version of. There's stuff like that fence right there was turned. Oh, and also you'd want to add player collision walls, so that way they couldn't walk out of the map, even if there's like openings that, you know, they could walk through. That this would be the end of the level. So, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. This was fun to work on, and hopefully I can make more to come.